This video is for teachers who are looking for an overview of Day 8 in Unit 2 of the Passport to Social Studies curriculum. The focus questions of this lesson are, why was Native American land dispossessed, and what primary source best helps us explain this terrible history, with the objective of students being able to determine the causes of Native American removal and evaluate the reliability of primary sources to determine which has the greatest utility to explain this terrible history. As might be the case with several lessons in this unit, students may find the content distressing or upsetting. However, it is still important that we study these events and critically assess the sources that were created. In this Note to Teachers slide, links are shared to resources from Facing History and ourselves, as well as the National Museum of the American Indian, that offer strategies and ideas to help address this. One last thing to consider is this reminder that we still use our virtual classroom or remote learning platform to continue to provide space for students to express their discomfort and feelings of anger or distress that may emerge from learning about these topics in history. The lesson starts with students engaging with the map titled Removal of American Indians 1830 to 1838, and they do this using a 3-2-1 strategy. If you haven't used this discussion technique before, it's great because it promotes student discussion and collaboration, but through a very low-stakes manner. Basically, the students independently record 3 big ideas, which they will enter in these boxes on the left. Then you pair them up into breakout rooms and they share their 3 with a partner, so that brings a total to 6. But they must then decide which 2 out of those 6 are really key to understanding this, or what really resonated with them. And then once they discuss and reach consensus about those 2, they then independently think about it and then independently narrow it down to 1. One benefit of this activity is that students are required to discuss and reach consensus, and by doing so, they hear the thoughts, ideas, and rationales of their peers, and this often has a tremendous impact on student learning. If you are interested in extending this activity and the student discussions, you can modify the 3rd step by, instead of having the students narrow it down to 1 independently, you instead join the pairs into groups of 4. Logistically, to do this over Zoom, open the breakout room window, and when you put the cursor on a student's name, you have the option to click Move To, which will allow you to move them to another breakout room. Since this will likely be happening along with a lot of other teacher stuff going on, the way I keep all this straight is to move all the students in odd rooms into the even ones that are listed right below it in the window. So I would move both students from room 1 into room 2, and the students in room 3, I would then combine them and move them into room 4. But this is totally dependent on the unique needs of your students and the dynamic nature of your class. If you choose to do this, the groups of 4 then can share their 4 big ideas from this middle part and discuss it and narrow it down to only 1. The next step is to facilitate a whole class discussion where students share their big ideas and they record 3 that really resonated with them in the spaces provided here. And then they use that, plus their prior knowledge, plus the map, to create their own definition of Native American removal. From there, the students will read and annotate the long history of Native American removal, which we can actually see right here. And also you will notice that there are guiding questions in the margin on the right-hand side. Now, I know it doesn't explicitly say it here, but you may want to give them a specific focus for their annotations by instructing them to identify the causes of Native American removal by using different colors for each of the causal classifications that they had been using all unit, like one color for triggers, one color for short-term, and another for long-term causes. Doing so will really support them as they complete the causation tool, which we see here on slide 13 and 14. The students are then asked to apply their learning to these discussion prompts, which revolve around the concept of settler colonialism. And these first 3 questions can kind of be viewed as stepping stones, hopefully leading to deeper understanding and insight for this last one. To facilitate this discussion, you could have the students post their responses for these first 3 prompts in a public space for the whole class to see, like an online discussion board that is common in a lot of the virtual learning platforms like Nearpod, or in a standalone site like Padlet. Numbering their responses and entering them in the Zoom chat is also an option, as is having the students unmute and share verbally. Since the 4th one requires the students to make a claim and provide a rationale for it, you may decide to provide the opportunity for students to share and react to the ideas of your classmates. But again, this is contingent upon the dynamics of your class and the scheduling. Again, time permitting, you can pair them up in a breakout room for a short amount of time and instruct them to share their response with their partner and to provide one piece of positive, constructive feedback. Taking time now to ensure students have a solid grasp on settler colonialism is important because it's going to come up again when they are doing the wrap-up activity. After this, the students will examine the image of John Ross, a Cherokee chief, and assess its reliability by considering these 4 factors, which are adapted from the sourcing and evaluating reliability tool. When introducing this activity to your students, remind them that they are not looking at this image in isolation, but rather they should rely heavily on what they just read in the long history of Native American removal, as well as their prior knowledge, to inform their thinking. As this is an image, these 4 elements might be a little abstract and require a fair degree of inferencing. To guide my students, I would first draw their attention back to the headnote that accompanies the picture and ask them a question connecting that to what they just read in the secondary source. Second, I would advise them that they should do these in order because each may provide some insight into the one that follows. For instance, after identifying the artist's point of view, his purpose and bias might become more evident, especially when considering what it says in that text. They will then use all of this work to now evaluate the reliability of the image, making sure that their explanation is grounded in at least one of those 4 factors. As they are now about to repeat this process with a primary source of their choosing, you may decide your students will benefit from this one being more of a model that you did collaboratively. You may also consider using this point as an informal check for understanding to ensure that students do not need any reteaching or clarification before continuing with the independent work. There are several ways you can do this. One quick way that comes to mind would be for students to do a chat waterfall, where they all enter the reliability number they ascribe to the image into the chat. Then they make sure that their setting is set to everyone, then instruct the class to submit at the exact same time. As the numbers come in, note general trends and look for outliers that you may want to follow up with. You can even ask for student volunteers or call on specific students to explain their rationale. For the second part of this independent activity, they will select one of these 3 primary sources that will contribute to their understanding of the removal of Native Americans. The first is a letter, the second is a painting, and the third is an artifact. And like it mentions here in the directions, the students will work in small groups to achieve this. And in the guidance for instruction slide that precedes this one, it does mention that groups of 3 are preferential. The idea is that each student will assess the reliability of one using the sourcing and evaluating reliability tool that is already incorporated into each source. They will then share their findings with their group, which will inform all of their arguments for both the final check for understanding and the wrap-up prompt. To facilitate the small group sharing, it is recommended that you use a note-sharing site such as Padlet, although there are numerous other sites that can be used to accomplish this. On this slide is a walkthrough of how students can post their findings, and depending on the class dynamics, you can have each group have their own discussion board, or you may opt to have the entire class contribute to a single one. I would lean towards providing each small group with their own, because I think it would let them really focus and reflect on the findings of their group mates. However, a colleague of mine prefers a single larger one because the students are exposed to a greater array of ideas. Regardless of what you decide, it is imperative the students include the name of the source and author in the title of their comment, which we can see the space for is right here. Regardless of what site you use or their manner in which you set it up, ensuring the discussion board is available to students as they answer this final CFU is vital, because remember, they did not analyze all the sources themselves. This wrap-up question requires the students to consider everything they learned from this lesson and connect it back to that discussion about settler colonialism. And although it doesn't directly call for it here, I would push students to include relevant supporting evidence from that source that they just identified as being the most reliable.